about, because Tableau is like just one of my favorite weapons, and I think it's just such an incredible and honestly magical and mythic tool. And I kind of feel like I'm visiting the lake today to see where it came from. This is my first time visiting you guys, and I'm really excited to go under the water, go subsurface a little bit, and kind of like understand some of the magic. So Ben and I talked about what we should talk about today, and he said, let's talk about your three latest projects. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll start with the one in the middle, called Data City, and this one. So all of these are going to be very heavy on origin story. Pretty much like one of my favorite things to learn about is how things came to be, and so I'll give you probably a pretty heavy version of the origin story of a lot of these, and sort of what inspired me, and this is how this project started. Was making this animation, or actually the desire to make this animation to see every major Vegas implosion at once. and so I kind of like, this is summer 2015, and I forget exactly what sparked this, and then it's like, oh, well, Tableau's going to Vegas this year. And like, oh, well, maybe there's something more here. And I called up one of my buddies, and this guy's like a cross between Dustin Hoffman's Rain Man and a professional like soccer athlete. And so he was one of my classmates at MIT. His name's Mike, and he's a complete gambling kind of like degenerate. And when I say like complete, I mean like he runs a fund during the day, but at night for fun, he runs a multi-million-dollar college betting fund based on a strategy he developed while he's a classmate with me at MIT, and it's been like written up on ESPN, and like total like Vegas nerd, right? From like a sports betting angle. And so he laid out, oh, you want to do a story about Vegas and like all the data that Vegas runs on. Because I already had like a handle on like all the betting angles, like all the real estate angles. Like I'd basically seen Casino, right? And like understood that like there is a pretty shrewd substructure to the city. And he laid out, here are all the different stories that are in that city, all about numbers. And then so I took my implosions and I took what Mike gave me, and I kind of cooked for a couple weeks, and I came up with this, which is Data City. And for kind of the uninitiated, this is a pretty straight reference to Frank Miller's classic Sin City graphic novel series. Okay. So what's Data City? So stylized like Frank Miller's comic book, there's a very loose narrative as we travel through kind of one night in Vegas. And as you travel through one night in Vegas, I kind of take a really casual look at some of these numbers. And so this is kind of the first, the title page, and it's kind of like almost looks like a blood splatter, especially if you're familiar with like Frank Miller's work. But like it's also a map, and so these are all the direct flights from America. And what's one of the things that's special about Vegas is like it may have like it's definitely like for the given size of the city like an enormous amount of direct flights, like cities that fly directly there. Okay, so and so you have that kind of like map, and it's very, very stylized. But then like you also have like the beginning of the narrative, because you have SFO to Las Vegas, which is of course like the flight that I took, right? And so to Tapestry, to Data 15. So so we go from there, and no data here, but it kind of starts the narrative and starts talking about how we're landing in Vegas, and again, like kind of the protagonist is highlighted in the window of the plane in red. And I'm not going to walk you through each panel. I'll kind of like pause briefly to point out like some of the charts, but like the basic idea is like these charts are like, pretty simple, and like the data was pretty available. And but what was interesting about this to me was trying to like fuse some sort of aesthetic and emotion that I think of when I think of Las Vegas with also this kind of like comic book format. And like Nick Susanis, who spoke at Tapestry earlier this year, I've learned so much from him because we've got him now. He's in San Francisco, which is like awesome. And so things that you can do in a comic book is spend time with it. And so the idea here is that you have this deplane passengers, right? And there's there's this seasonal, which is sort of, if you look at like the temperature at the bottom of the page, right? And so there's sort of a connection between those two things. And then, but you can also dig a little bit deeper into these deplane passengers and see that it's like increasing every single year. And so there's like a couple patterns there, but again, like these are pretty simple. And this is kind of starting with like giving the tip to the driver. Like you introduce this idea, like the whole city runs on not only numbers, but particularly money. And so as you're driving in, there's this idea like kind of you're approaching the strip, and like the strip is basically owned by 3 different companies, like they own the entire strip. And so it's like shows like those 3 companies and which casinos they own. And so like, kind of a map, here's what survived from the implosion, like original investigation. And like what's cool, and here again is kind of, it's looser data storytelling, I think, but it's still there, is that you have here where all the implosions happen, and you can see it's directly kind of correlated to the housing crash, right? Because once we crashed, like nobody blew up buildings because nobody wanted to build anything on the real estate anymore. And so total house win versus player win rate, right? So how much money do you get to take home on average versus how much money are people actually betting on all these different games? Like they're really simple charts. Exploiting the sex industry in Vegas and how like even the sex industry is like completely mechanized, just like gambling, right? And like and then this is sort of like it's not a chart, but there's all these machines that are now watching you and doing all kinds of behavioral analysis on you. So like it's still a data story even though there's no chart. Okay, and then finally it kind of ends at a nightclub, because Vegas has had this really important kind of crossover where more money is made like outside of gambling on the strip than in gambling. And so that's kind of the final chart, and then we kind of pay some like homage to like where did all the data come from and where can you learn more, like, but still in the same kind of aesthetic. So I think that this is like a good introduction to trying to pack emotion like into a data story. But I want to keep moving because I think the next 2 are even more interesting. So next one is endangered safari. And so maybe some of you have played with this. I actually don't have a copy open, but if we want, we can play with it. But the general idea is like you hover over an animal and you get to see where that animal lives in Africa. And then you also get to see some interesting facts about the animal, such as like what is its endangered species status, is its population decreasing or increasing, and also this is also kind of like deeper in the design, but the placement of the animal is very intentional. It's very intentional that it kind of looks like a mess, but it's actually there's a lot of structure to where each animal is placed. Okay, so and obviously done with Tableau and published in Tableau Public.
Not obviously, but
yeah.
yes.
Okay, so anatomy of a design. So here comes the first origin story. So after my very first tapestry, I flew, I think almost immediately, like the next day, to Kenya. And I had experiences like this, where I took my camera and had the opportunity to take photos like that. And when you go on these safaris, and there's all kinds of different safaris, there are walking safaris, there's like camping, there's bicycle safaris, there's truck safaris, there's hot air balloon safaris, like somebody somewhere is probably pogo sticking safari. You get to interact with the animals in many, many different ways. And what I realized very, very quickly was how I didn't have any real structure in my head on where to place all these different animals. I had no framework. I went there familiar with maybe 40 or 50 large mammals, and there's hundreds. And there's lots of different varieties of the ones you think that there's only one of, most recently, like the giraffe, right? Did you ever see the news about giraffe, like a couple weeks ago? It's like there used to be one giraffe, but now because of, DNA investigation, like they're actually going to treat that single giraffe species into 4 separate species. And the whole classification of animals in general is kind of like slowly changing because of genetics. Because now what we know, it's not all about kind of like outward appearances, which was all kind of originally based on in archaeology evidence. Now we have genetics, and genetics is kind of being folded in. So I had no structure in the back of my head on like who are these animals, like where do they live, and like is like do we eat these animals or not? Because I eat like a lot of these animals, and like so is this one I can eat or is this protected, right? So we lived in this smaller city of about like 500,000 people in Kenya, and kind of like in like an expat kind of like compound, like think kind of like Hotel Rwanda kind of situation. Thankfully, like not while we were there, but like it's been used like for like Hotel Rwanda was in the past. And so there's a library there, and I found this book in the library. And so this is like definitely a loved copy of a field guide with all these great illustrations that date back, I think, to like the 50s and 60s of all these animals. And so I started kind of pouring through this field guide and learning, and then I was like, all right, like where's the database on like the modern database on African mammals? And I want to actually like really wrap my head around this. And so that curiosity was coupled with a couple other motivating forces. One is I just come off Tapestry, and I was super fired up, not only about Tableau as a tool, but like the Tableau community. And so I was really interested in publishing something with Tableau, whereas previously I had only used it kind of behind the scenes and like to do analysis, but never really to do storytelling with it. And so I was really hungry to publish something with Tableau. So this is kind of where I found myself. The IUCN is the organization that says this animal is endangered, and they raise money and go do studies of wildlife and kind of crunch the numbers. And then I knew I wanted to get to Tableau, and the question is like, okay, well, how are we going to connect those two in a way that kind of I want to? And yeah, right. And like Ellie feels kind of like described my work something like it's very hacky. So like, yeah. So here it comes. So these are the tools I use for this project, and so let's see, what do we have? We have like a GIS tool. We have some Adobe. We have some custom scripts. We have looking at archives of images, and then to get all the animal sizes, I actually I went back to that same field guide and just like read them out of there, because like, well, the science has changed on these animals, but they haven't gotten bigger. So all the field guide listed all the shoulder heights, and so that and like it's like shoulder heights, and then for all the monkeys and apes, it's like head to tail, but not including length of tail. So okay, so this is kind of the process of how this was put together. And we went from the red list gave us geographic files, and so these GIS maps, they're sort of a routine that I learned from somebody, and you kind of like pushed out point coordinates to Tableau. You can kind of, I mean, you probably know how to do that, but push out like a series of latitude and longitude points and tell Tableau what order to connect them in and make polygons. So that's where the maps came from. The animal name, status, and kind of what species the animal order that they're in, like that was direct. And then we have this artistic piece, which is the animals themselves. And so there was some kind of creative batch processing where you're kind of like taking photos and creating silhouettes and also kind of like blurry colored versions of the animals when you highlight the animal, and then reading in the sizes, and so you have like all these different animals, but like you have to size them to each other, and then you also have to lay them out somehow, right? And so all of that was done in Illustrator, and then I used an export script to figure out where all those objects were placed on my Illustrator canvas, and then also how big each object was within Illustrator. And so I have a few slides kind of like detailing it, but like this is the general process. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, this is like photo editing, but this is like this is like the latter half of the process, because it took some time to like get to folder 2. But basically, there was a French database of all these illustrations that I found, all these like old illustrations. So you find that database, like select the animals you want, go find more images for wherever the holes are, and then so eventually you get here, and then you sort of batch process it to this point and this point, and then manually selecting the ones you want facing the other way. So I chose to do that instead of flipping the image, because I think I couldn't figure out how to do that within the program. So that's kind of like, now I have this library of animal images, both silhouettes and also like these like kind of blurry versions that show a little bit of detail, but mostly show the color of the animal. And then I've put both these libraries on Git now, so people are using them for like other projects, which is cool. And then the layout. So in Illustrator, you take all these animals, and I don't have it here, but I actually like made like a giant ruler, and it was just like how tall is like the wildebeest supposed to be, and you just like size down, and then you lay them all out. And the idea behind this is that you have like all the predators on top, then you have the monkeys and like the apes, and of course you have man as one of the apes, and like that's kind of a joke and kind of a reminder like we're animals too, and we live here as well. But it's also like here's your scale, right? It's like right there, and looking at it, it's like holy crap, elephants aren't actually that big. And then I would like look at it here, and then I'd pull up a picture of an elephant or a person. Like, yes, they are. And like similar kind of with the giraffe. And, so laid everything out. It was all kind of nice. We'll see later that like all the animals that live that are related, like so all the gazelle are kind of like all clustered. You can see the kind of the rhinos are together. The 3 different types of zebra are together. And yeah, so we exported, and this is kind of what it looks like from this export script I found. And then you kind of take this and reshape it, so Tableau likes it, and then away we go. Another point on design, just because I think this is kind of, I really wanted to maintain the color scheme, IUCN color scheme, but like the stoplight color scheme is like horrible, right? And so I really like tried to like figure out how to get a stoplight color scheme, to work, and that was kind of connected to this original color scheme that would, it was recognized at some point, which is kind of cool. All right, so that's the colors, that's the animals. This is what the maps look like in GIS. And then one of the things I love using Tableau for is actually to like debug data. And so And when you plot these maps, a lot of them would, not all of them, but some of them would like, this is for a single animal, and it's obvious that like this is like 4 different regions and they shouldn't be connected. And so because I could plot the sequence with colors, I could see where the breakpoint was, right? And I could like go right to that breakpoint and see exactly where I should like cleave it into different pieces. And so I was able to debug the maps like pretty fast, like using this like method. So you go from something like this to this. So like, okay, this is nice and clean. And then also like the way I separated these was I used this like length times area like calculation in order to like make all like find like where the custom, like where each shape was, and like, yeah, but not all of them were like this obvious. Like some of them were like really really horrible. I think this is one of the interesting things looking at this data was that the animals that people, like the 40 animals that I knew going to Africa, like they had many more regions. Like why? Because they're studied, right? Where like some animals, like they live on the southern half of Africa, like big wide swath, right? Where like this is, I think might be elephants, and so it's like very, very specific. This is where elephants live. Okay, so this is awesome, and like community like loved it, which is awesome, and it's so great to get that kind of feedback. So this was published like May or so, 2015. Fast forward a year, and I have I'm trying to bag a client, and while we're like talking back and forth, she was like, "Oh, hey, like there's this data storytelling contest. You should totally enter it." And it was like due the next day, and it was Science Magazine's inaugural data storytelling contest. And I was like, "Oh, okay," but it was a video, and I was like, "Well, I've done animations, but I've never done a video before." And like, well, I know how to make like keynote videos, and I already have all this data. And so I made this like the morning it was due, and the like it's like, well, it was a perfect contest because it was a 90-second video. It's like I can do 90 seconds. Like, it was a 5-minute video, it would not have happened. And so I made this video called "Are Gazelles Endangered?" I don't know. I'm worried about sound. Sometimes when I plug into this thing's like super, super loud. But anyway.
Hear a bit of it if it happens.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe it'll be loud. So yeah. So 90 seconds videos, and then kind of like, yeah. Let's see if it plays. Nice like 90-second intro really to the biz, right? It's like it encourages you to like investigate and go play with it yourself, which I think is kind of neat, and what made this really easy to execute was I found a good entry point, which was this like question like, are gazelles endangered, and like why gazelles? Well, it's like, well, that's the one animal where there's an example at each different level of threatened species status. and maybe like the only one. I mean, like our monkey's in danger. Like you could do that, right? But then there's so many. Like it's tough. So the ability to honestly like use Tableau to go like figure out like who's like, because I was able to sort by all these different species classifiers, and to identify which animal had a lot of this spectrum covered. Let me pick on the gazelles, use it as an entry point to the rest of the animals, and then kind of toss it over. So this one, which is cool, that was really great. And so like the sometimes like you put these kind of like very creative artistic things out there, and it's really not for like over a year, like until you really get like certain feedback on it. And so the love from the Tableau community, all the recognition by science is wonderful, but like there's certain types of feedback that like kind of like beats all. So
What'd you say?
I was like, yeah, like send me pics.
Did you check to see where they were tattooing
I
before you asked?
did not. I mean, I guess it'd have to be a back tattoo. I mean, it's a pretty like substantial work, but I don't know. I've never received pics, so maybe that's a good thing. But like in all honesty, like notes like this are like amazing. But in particularly this one, I got a lot of notes from in my design write-up of this piece. I talked about being a kid and reading zoo books, and like I got a lot of notes from parents saying I'm buying my kids zoo books, and like how their kid likes playing with it. Like that's pretty neat. Okay, so that's the second piece. Should we pause here, or should we kind of like cruise through?
I think we should cruise right through number 3 because we got Q&A on all 3.
Yeah, all right, let's do that. And then you'll get some kind of like arc, because these are the kind of like, the 3 big works in the last year.
So that was your first video though, right? The gazelle one? That was the first time you played around with it?
Yeah, not the first animation, but the first video. Yeah. Okay, so the next one is profiling the parks. This came out a few weeks ago, and this is longer than 90 seconds. It's like I think it's like 4 minutes. And so we'll watch it, and then I'll tell you the origin story, I guess. I'm gonna let this go through the credits because like credits are like, probably pretty relevant.
You did the drawing.
Mm-hmm. So, inspiration. Where did this come from? My wife and I went camping in Yosemite in late April of this year, and I had this kind of question when I was on the valley floors, and it was less kind of like foggy than it was here. And I kind of like looked up and I looked at how tall the valley was and how wide it was. And like, this is bigger than Zion, but I have no idea like how much bigger. And I also have no idea if I'm at a high, I know I'm like at elevation right now, but I don't know like how high of an elevation I'm at right now, like compared to Zion. And Zion's my favorite national park. I'm actually going there next week, which I'm really excited about. And so this kind of is like gnawing at me, and this is, I think, the most important frame from the whole video, because this is basically what I wanted to see when I was there. I wanted to understand how big is Yosemite versus Zion, and also like not only how big are they relative to each other, but also like positioned to like sea level, like where are these things? And so this type of comparison and hopefully enables kind of like node A versus node B comparison, which I talked about in my tapestry talk, right? Which was like this slide.
No, I think I probably had the same thought. I just shrugged and went on and probably tripped over a stick. So,
like node A versus node B comparisons, like this is, you know, as data visitors or data storytellers, like this is like at the core, like this is what we do. Like we give you A, we give you B in a way that lets you compare both of them. And of course, like what we're really doing is we're creating an environment or an experience where everybody who sees this does the same thing. Like everybody's doing this, right? And like making that comparison. And so that's kind of like what I wanted to. This is like most of the motivation, but like motivation isn't just like about like hiking and seeing wild animals, and it's like not always just like fun and games. Like this came out maybe a week or two after I returned from this hike, and so 538 published this article about the national parks, and it's like pretty standard data journalism these days. Like you don't have like a nice bump chart, but this, I think it's a bump chart, maybe not. Yeah, it is rank, and this just like crushed me. Like I hated this, even though it's a fine article, and it's like, but this felt like even though the author, I don't think he lives in New York, I didn't know that at the time. Like I felt like this is somebody who sits in a cubicle in Manhattan and has never been to a national park. Like that's the only way you'd write about the national parks in terms of their lead-off chart was like number of visitors. Like this is not like an NCAA tournament. Like you can't talk about like our national parks like this. Like it had just zero emotion and like number of visitors, like hours spent, like as if the national parks are about the visitors. Like that's not what the national parks are about at all, right? And not only that, but it's like there wasn't a single map. Like at the very least, like you have to show it. Like where are they, right? Like so this is like not a driving force, but like this kind of stuff like hovers out there and can also be like repurposed for good, I think. Okay, so in the same way that I kind of like showed a map of how Endangered Safari was built, I thought I'd do the same thing for this. And so this is kind of Candyland here. So inspiration through modeling, illustration, and production. So connecting inspiration to YouTube, basically. And so this is almost like embarrassing to show, but like the weekend I got back, I use this free tool online called GeoContext, and it's awesome. I think the one we use is French. Yeah, so like here we are, right? And like the basic idea is like you draw a path and it shows you the elevation along the path, and it's really easy and quick, and you can export like CSV. It's awesome, and so I used this and I started like snooping around a bunch of different parks. This is Zion, and I built this like really quickly, and I say it's embarrassing to show this because like the amount of effort between this and the final product is you know, not unsubstantial. And then like, well, I don't know if the final effort's really that much better than this. Like this is pretty good actually. It's pretty cool. And so okay, so anyway, that's kind of like investigation. Like, is this type of data available? Like, how would you go about like just kind of like poking around? All right, so we'll put that up as like our first steps. And then I had this idea of, this is a cartoon, I kind of like doctored up by drawing a red line. It's like, I knew I wanted to take these types of like cuts of earth and like then draw these, and then slice them even further along these lines and make these like profiles. Like that's kind of like what I was going after, which is what you do when you use that GeoContext tool. And so I started, I looked at like every National Geographic kind of like graphic through their archive like in the last like 40 years, and I found this one. I was like, aha, that's what I want to do. And I like taught myself like whatever, you know, like these are actually called like transverse profiles, and there's huge like cartography science. And then, you know, I blew this up, and this is from 1981 or 83, I think. And I found this company's name. I found that company, and I found that that company was headquartered across the bay from where I live. Like, and they're still in business. Like, so put that back in like back of your head. Okay, so found that pretty early on and kind of understood the type of like maps that I kind of wanted to build, and then I started assembling a mood board. And so mood board of two things. One of different types of maps that I thought kind of captured the aesthetic that I wanted. And so these go all the way back into the early 19th century. And you can probably recognize a couple of these famous ones, even small. Assembling different historic maps, but then also assembling like favorite travelers' sketchbooks. And so I wanted to kind of give this kind of hand-drawn map, but also like as if you were like doing it while you were there kind of feel. And these are like two resources I want to highlight because they're just like fantastic. USGS, I believe, put this out, and it's a free like colossal PDF of what they call like oblique maps, and then also this website, Relief Shading, on relief shaded maps. You know, how do you give dimension to like, you know, 2D planes is just really interesting stuff. All right, so we have a mood board, and that's of course being tweaked throughout the whole project. Then I kind of like start storyboarding what I want this to look like, and it starts on a whiteboard, and then I pull all these into Keynote, and then it becomes digital. And again, kind of like the storyboard is always being kind of updated, and you know, trying to understand motion and that kind of stuff. And then I start playing with tools on my own, like how can we do this? You know, so using like SketchUp, where you can bring in elevation data and you can drape satellite imagery on the elevation data, kind of flying around Google Earth just to like understand perspective. One of the problems with elevation is that if you try to show any like the what's this stat, like the Earth is smoother than a pool ball, right? Like if you try to show any amount of Earth, like pretty soon everything looks flat. And so when you look at a lot of elevation maps, usually they are I forget the word that's used, but they're sort of like the y-axis is basically
Exaggerated.
juiced.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you see like the y-axis is like 5x or 10x, and like that lets you see the detail. And I decided pretty early on that I wanted to try to do it without like juicing elevation. I wanted to like keep elevation constant, and that presented like some like that was like an interesting design constraint. So I kind of like played around with these, and that was fun to poke around and help me understand where all the different parks I wanted to use, what perspective I wanted to take on each park, because I had to choose a line, right, for each park that I wanted to. And so these helped with that. And then that National Geographic Archive company, Dynamic Graphics, I started talking to them, and they started to really like the idea of helping me with this project, which was great. So we'll return to them in a second in modeling, but I think before I do that, I want to highlight one aspect of this process, and really all my processes, but really this one in particular, which is play. So I think play is really, really important, like as a creative. And so the piece starts off with a version of the National Park Service logo, and that kind of like came out of this idea of playing with doing animation. This isn't the one that's in the piece. This is like a digital watercolor, where one of the pieces is a hand colored colored pencil. But so like I was making these kind of things like basically just for my friends on Instagram, and then I was doing research like there's the National Geographic and just looking at maps and everything. But then I was like, well, the National Park System has like an enormous collection of infographics because they have these brochures. And there's like tons of maps and all kinds of great information. It's like, well, I want to see them all. And so I collected all of them, and it's awesome because all you have to do is just write them. And when I say write, all you have to do is email them. When I say email, like you can batch email all the parks. And I immediately got responses from like half of them. It's like it's in the mail, like within like hours. It's amazing. And then when you do that, well, now you know a ranger at each park, right? And so you have a friend at all these different parks. So I have a complete set of national like park brochures, and I'm now working with a binder, and I'm binding so that like open each sheet's like this big, right? And so I'm binding them into an atlas. So I'll have like a giant atlas of all the national parks. And then when you get brochures, like you get extra brochures. And like, well, what do I want to do with extra brochures? So like, well, we can do like a paper cut project. And so I made this for one of my friends. Okay, so this animation, I also made another animation, so this didn't make it. I was thinking about doing like animals, plants, landforms, and I quickly decided, like, I've done animals, I've done plants before, like I just want to do the landforms, but like this one is looking at how big is a sequoia versus a hiker, and then also like versus a coastal redwood, right? And they're just like, these trees are just enormous. And so like, again, like continuing kind of like to play a little bit. All right, so I think play is really important, and you know, some of this circles back in the project, and some of it is just for fun. Part of working on like an intense project like is that like it's really fun to have like completion or to like share stuff with people and like to kind of like get some like feedback. And so like this kind of play is a way kind of to do that and get people excited about what you're working on. All right, back to data. All right, so the dynamic graphics company in particular, one person there got really excited about the idea of helping me produce this project, and along the way I started to understand how to work with DEM, digital elevation models, I think, and like I mean, I don't know if it's big data, but it's pretty big data when you think of like the entire continental U.S. I think they have it like it's either every meter or every 3 meters, like not in a grid, but not like in a strict like square grid because the Earth is curved, right? Which is like there's a whole science to that. You know, latitude point, longitude point, and elevation. And so understanding where I wanted these cross sections, then you take that you go get the data for those cross sections. Sometimes the data is released in like these blocks that look like this, and so sometimes the cross section will have to include several blocks, and you have to get several blocks and kind of stitch them together. And then once you do that, you also have to define a boundary around, and then finally you can use this company's software and create these kind of elevation models. So that's kind of like the strict, just like modeling. And then the modeling is used for two purposes. One, to make actual like 3D representations of the land, and then one to make these cross sections. And so, you start with something like this, and then you draw 2 points. I mean, like with data, because like you're defining it, and then you basically this line you can drape that line across the landform, and then you can also drape satellite imagery in the same way you can do a SketchUp with Google data, and then that program can export something like this. And then using a bunch of different artistic techniques, you can kind of illustrate like the 3D form like this.
By hand?
So that's not by hand, actually. These are not by hand. And I have many like rotating models that I just cut out of the video, because it's like the whole first act of the video is all about Zion, like trying to explain to people what a transverse profile is. And really, you only need to see like the whole 3D thing, like at that point to understand that. So building these things, sometimes you don't build one of these, but you change the perspective here, maybe 50 times, maybe 100 times, so you can actually get 50 frames and rotate it and see it. So that's kind of like one output of the modeling, and then the other output. This is all by hand. Is the cross-sectional profiles, and so this looks very, very similar to what geocontext gives you, but we take that, and then this ends, near wherever this is, but actually then you drop it to sea level, and you get to have fun coloring. So let's see, play, modeling, illustration. And then some of the illustrations, like not data-driven at all, it's like all this kind of like chart chunk, basically. And so like there's like different chart chunk that kind of helps move the story along. So we'll put some of the chart chunk on, and that's kind of like all built from like reference images. Scanning a lot of this in, tweaking colors and other things with Photoshop. And then around this time I was laying everything out. And I showed it to one of my colleagues, Catherine Madden, who I met at Tapestry, and she's like, "This is awesome, but your text sucks." And so she probably didn't say sucks, but that was kind of like the one. And she's like, "So let me do that for you." I'm like, "Yes, that would be fantastic." And so she uses Procreate and was hand lettered the entire piece, which is like phenomenal. And then like the last piece is production, which isn't that interesting. But laying pieces out, making transitions, it's like a lot of work with timing, picking out some different music and finally like pushing it into YouTube. But like as you can see, like it's not like a particularly like professional tool set that was used to produce it. and I thought about like doing it in After Effects, and it was like it's like too much. Way too much. Like you didn't need it to do this level of movie. So, all right, maybe the next one I'll do something. So that is profiling the parks. So I have a whole computer full of content that we could have fun with, but first I'll throw the sword back to you, and maybe we'll pause for some discussion.
I actually had a comment to make.
Yeah.
You mentioned a bit about putting man on the safari graphic as a joke, but it's not. If you believe that phylogeny work that people are doing on the giraffe, that is the only place you can put us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it's in the right place, for sure. Yeah.
It's actually, my previous gig was in a population genetics lab at the UW, and it's actually important to keep doing that because a lot of people want to forget that.
Yeah.
And I like it for practical reason, which is that you can kind of tell now it's your frame. It becomes a frame of reference for the height of all the animals as well, right? It's hard to know exactly how tall everything is. You put a human being in there, and it immediately gives you that frame of reference of comparison. So
and like, I mean, it's kind of sly because it's not like, it's not particularly highlighted, right?
I didn't notice it was there.
Yeah, so it's like, do you highlight it?
I looked at it
like,
million times.
do you not? And so, how much of this do you want to be like really direct and like hit people over the head, and how much of it is like Easter eggs and like discoverable? There's like games in like all like the fine print, always, and sometimes people find it, then then it's fun. So I mean, all of this stuff. So everything I've shown you is like for me, it's all like it's almost like a game, right? Like this is all stuff like passion projects, all done for fun. Like some of these are stuff done before 7 a.m. and after 10 p.m. only kind of stuff. So
So when you're working on a project like this, at what point does the narrative that you want to tell start injecting itself in the process, and how much does it get kind of influenced by when you're actually looking at your data? Is there kind of a feedback loop that you're doing, and what's that process?
Yeah, so narrative versus data. I think that there are certain things that, like, there's certain data that, for example, the national parks that were cut. Like, there were parks that didn't make the cut. Like, they auditioned, and they gave strong auditions, but they were cut. And I think this goes to a bigger point about biases. So making videos, I think more than anything else, introduces a lot of biases. Because when you make a video, you are, like, by definition, like a movie is, you're controlling the perspective. And that's something I'm really, really aware of, and like really like only semi-comfortable with. Like there's one thing where like there's biases in how you build like endangered safari. Like, well, why aren't rats on there? Like rats are mammals, and there's a lot of different interesting rats in Africa. Well, nobody cares about rats, and they're small, and you wouldn't be able to see them. And so I cut them. And well, what about Madagascar? There's like incredible diversity of life that's incredibly endangered on Madagascar. Like there's not a single unique to Madagascar animal on that piece. Why? Because they're so unique and there's so many of them that they would completely just like tank the piece. Like it would just they would like all the attention would be there. They would completely dominate. And even though it's an important story, it's kind of like it should be its own story. But those are the types of biases that I introduce when making that. When I make something like a video, like it's really extreme. And it gets even more extreme, I think, like almost like the shorter the video is. And so the one thing is like, if you follow New York Times graphics on Twitter, like they have these really awesome animations that are really quick and really digestible and really skewed. Like really, really skewed. Like I see some of them and I'm like, if you don't think it's like data journalism and you think it's clickbait, then maybe it's okay. But they had one recently. It was like, here are the 25% cities where like crime is on the rise, and they had like these arrows that like shot up directly out of the map, and it was like so sensational, like journalism. It's like, yeah, like 25 crime is rising in 25% of American cities. Like, let's highlight it with like bright red arrows and like scare you and look how dangerous Chicago is. And it's like, okay, so what's going on in these like other 75% of large American cities? How about that? And so, yeah, I kind of answered a separate question. For the national parks, like what was cut were particular parks. Like for example, and why did I cut them? Because they were the landform was uninteresting. Everglades National Park, really uninteresting. like all the different caves, really uninteresting. Like you could do a cutaway view, and there are some some gorgeous like 3D modeled illustrations of some of these cave systems, but it doesn't fit with this aesthetic. And so see you later. And then like Olympic National Park. Like Olympic was like almost made the cut, and it's like, you know what? It's like it's too similar to some of the other ones. There's a lot of mountains. I kind of like the Rockies more than the Pacific. No, that's not bad at all. But so I think like cutting data is like the first kind of like decision to support the narrative. I'm trying to think of like other like, and that's like not done to necessarily boost the data either. Like when you cut data, like you're boosting the narrative, like you're deciding to go for the narrative. But at the same time, it's like why do we data viz? Like one, it's like for comprehension, like you can understand data, right, when you visualize it. But the other is like the other side is engagement, and so that's like I think that's like the narrative part. Like there's 59 parts. Like you could have done something with 59 parts. There's a way to do something for 59 parts. And like, then then nobody watches it. It's not interesting. The engagement drops. So I made an animation almost purely with Tableau that's shown at the White House a few months ago. Maybe it's really quick. Do you want to see that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So also in science, we had this article published with colleagues at MIT about studying entrepreneurship, and the punchline is basically they can make a really unreasonable prediction on the quality of entrepreneurship. Why this is important to the science is that when we study entrepreneurship, we usually study the quantity, like how much entrepreneurship is going on, and like that's actually not that important because it's highly correlated to population size, and more pizza shops and laundromats isn't particularly important if you're trying to build the next Tableau. And so this is an illustration of data from 1988 all the way up until 2012. Each bubble is an address. Bigger the bubble, the more observations at the addresses. So big bubbles are going to be like innovation hubs, right? Startup kind of central. And so like before playing the animation, like you can already see total observations. You can see kind of like the spike and crash, the tech bubble, and like the recovery. And then you can also see sort of in this geographic area, you can see things like, again, that spike and crash mirrored in very, very high quality businesses, represented like dark red. And then you can also see like this emergence of a lot of like low quality businesses as this neighborhood is gentrified in like the last 10 years, which is just kind of like a second thing that nobody recognized until we actually like visualized it. And so I think this will play with a click. So what you'll see is just every year, so it's like each of these are new businesses every year. And so you can sort of, and so this is like a really, I think, a pretty good example of like, oh my gosh, like it's complex. You have a lot of, like, you guys have this data, that's amazing. But like told in kind of like a somewhat engaging way. Pause it at the summary. Like that. Yeah, so there's a summary. So there's like all the new businesses, and you can kind of see, so almost completely, done Tableau, but kind of like stitched together afterwards.
From my brother's office.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's an interesting thing where like there's a handoff. Like if we went back to the animation, like this. So this was a hub of innovation, and then these companies like grew up and stayed, and so like that real estate was like no longer used for new companies, and so like this is like the first half of it's like this is the 90s, and like this is the aughts with the emergence of Kendall Square, which is kind of interesting. And then like the MIT people love to like actually zoom out on this map and show like the MIT ecosystem versus the Harvard ecosystem. Just kind of, you know, I don't know.
Can you measure quality here? Is this revenue?
So the quality is this percentile distribution, and so the science behind it is basically when you register a company, there's a lot of public information at or near the time of registration, such as your name. Okay, well, like, what can we do with your name? Well, we can do NLP on the name and figure out like certain keywords that would point to like a semiconductor, like point to, oh, this company has a shot at growing, and certain keywords like pizza, where like you have less of a shot at going. Or like there's other things, you know, like the founder's name. And if the founder's name is in the name of the company, oh, well, like that's like a family firm, or it's a law firm, or like that also kind of like knocks you down a bit. And what type of registration is it? Is it a C Corp? Is it a Delaware C Corp? That kind of boosts you. Like, are you structuring the company to receive VC?
It's a scoring system, basically.
So a data-driven, you know, scoring system, and that scoring system is what got published in Science, and then this is kind of like an exhaust project from that publication. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, we did in Science. I did this like cartoon that showed one street in Silicon Valley, or in Palo Alto rather, and it showed all the companies that were registered on that single street, like on that single block, or actually one side of the block. And so you could see all the physical structures and like all the different businesses that were registered. And similar to like the Gazelle story, like you were able to see the entire spectrum and like understand the schema right there, because there's maybe like 20 businesses and 20 businesses, and then like we showed the score for each business, and then we explained next to each bubble like why the score was like high or low. And so you could like, and when you pair that sort of like infographic with the traditional way science talks about this, like social science talks about this, you know, then it's powerful. Yeah. Because the social scientists,
it's putting subjectivity in that.
Yeah, well, the subjectivity, but it makes it more accessible, because a social scientist will understand like the table and kind of like regression that like accompanies this, but like only the expert understands
that level.
Yeah.
So we got only a couple minutes left. I think we're going to lose the room, RJ. So I want to put you on a spot. I didn't tee you up on this at all, but what are the couple, 2 or 3 things that you would like to see or wish Tableau did differently or better? And then next would be... there you go.
So I'm afraid to put this up here, because I feel like whenever I was like, oh, I wish I could do this, somebody's like, oh, you don't know how to do that, and then somebody teaches me. So presentation button on Tableau Pub. Do we have that
on the application itself, or you mean in the dashboard?
In the browser.
Oh,
so that it goes like
full screen.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
so that would be awesome.
Like a full screen thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I do a lot is like when I build dashboards is like say I have like a matrix, and like one axis of the matrix, like I'll lay it out, and like I'll put like a bar chart that like corresponds to like one axis of the matrix, like going off of it. And like I wish there's a way to like just snap that, like if it's the same axis. So because I feel like I spend a lot of time just like dropping in like blank, and then and so just like get stuff to line up, and maybe that's like the graphic designer in me, but like I want like these things to line up, and so like somebody to do that. And then also, and I feel like Ken does this better. I've had experiences where like this is like Snap, but like sometimes I want to make a square grid with my X and Y axes, and so basically I want to size the X and Y axes. So it's not like dual axis synchronization, but like I want to synchronize like the sizing of the axes. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so like that, and like there's things that I don't like without like going to the code. Like I don't know how to make them data driven. Like for example, like and I haven't had a chance where I wanted to do this particular, but like transparency, right? Like, there's no like data driven like transparency, but like, but that's like a feature on the thing, and so like I want to be able to use data to drive it. Like I want to be able to use data to drive everything.
Instead of having just a control.
Yeah, like the control is great.
You want to be able to drive it from a data source.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
And I think like if we opened up like format and everything else, like again, kind of like maybe more graphic designer thing.
So you have a column in a spreadsheet that says whether your borders are on or off, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's I mean, it's really tough because like it's this unifying tool. It's like, well, I want you to be as good as like Creative Suite. I want you to be as good as ArcGIS. I want you to be as good as like it's like kind of like insane.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I feel like I was understanding two different things from you on the data-driven everything.
Yeah.
So can you give me a specific example with transparency, how you'd want that to work? Or like what you want it to do?
Yeah, I mean,
are you saying?
I would guess that would be a pretty niche like case, but it would be cool if there was like a right click somewhere, like when you're edit options and colors, and like transparency, like instead of like manually set it, link it, use this data field to drive transparency.
Level of transparency. Maybe.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
So the transparency on
Yes.
the Mark's cart.
If you have a table of information, it may have like color codes. You
Yeah.
want so that value to set the color.
Yeah, so
mark.
that would be
Or
that would be
something.
another example, right?
Yeah.
Can you do that?
No.
I know. I remember in like in Andy's Kraken like art thing, like he actually had the hex codes in his data, right?
Yeah, he was just using them as like labeling.
I think
and
it's
then
like,
hand assigning the
Hey
code.
guys.
that would,
Hey guys.
So I know
You're
we're
getting
late.
kicked out.
They're getting kicked out.
You're getting kicked out of the room. It's 3.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Kirkland, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was
Thank you.
pretty
Thank you guys. Hey, email me if you have any questions, okay? And I can get them over to
Okay.
RJ for you as well.
Oh, sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thanks. I got to run too. Yeah. Cool seeing you guys are folks outside here. So we'll wrap it up there. RJ, this is great. Thank you.
This call has been disconnected. Thank you for joining.